Under the bone-white sun of New Mexico, Eli Cartwright lived in silence. His cabin stood alone on Dry Creek Hill, where the wind carried more dust than mercy and even the coyotes gave him space. Once, this land had been green, with fences straight and a woman's laughter drifting from the porch. But fire had a way of taking not just the living, but the light that kept them company. When the flames came 5 years ago, they took his wife, his son, and half his face. What the fire didn't burn, the town's whispers finished. They called him a monster. Children dared each other to ride close enough to see him through the window. Men in town spoke his name like a curse, spitting it out between drinks. Eli didn't argue. He had learned that defending yourself only made people sharpen their lies. He mended fences for passing ranchers who didn't ask too many questions, traded leather for beans and salt, and rode home before dark. A man could live like that, half ghost, half memory, if he didn't look too long at the horizon. That afternoon, he was fixing the post line behind his barn when he heard the sound. Soft, uncertain. Not wind, not hooves. Something smaller. He turned, squinting into the glare. Down by the fence stood a little girl, barefoot, dress torn, clutching a rag doll that had lost one arm. Her hair was pale and tangled, her cheeks streaked with dirt. She didn't run when he looked at her, just stared back, wide-eyed, steady. Eli froze. Children didn't wander out here. Not alive, anyway. He dropped the hammer slowly, hands raised like he might spook her. You lost, kid? His voice came rough, more growl than words. She nodded once, barely. Mama went to heaven last week, she said, her voice thin as thread. I thought maybe she'd come back this way. Something inside him twisted. He took a careful step closer, and she didn't flinch. When the wind caught his coat and revealed the ruin of his face, he waited for the scream, the gasp, the recoil. None came. She just looked at him like she was trying to understand where the hurt went. Then, without fear, she reached out and touched the scar that split across his cheek. Does it hurt? She asked softly. He swallowed hard. Not anymore. The world went still around them. A burned man and a lost child, standing in the dust where no one else dared linger. For the first time in years, Eli Cartwright didn't feel cursed. He just felt seen. That night the desert wind never settled. It scraped against the cabin walls like a restless ghost, whispering of things long buried. Inside, Eli Cartwright sat by the stove, turning a tin cup between his hands. The girl, Clara, she'd said her name was, slept curled in an old wool blanket, her doll pressed to her chest. She hadn't cried once since he brought her in. Not when he cleaned the cuts on her feet. Not when thunder rolled over the hills like a drum calling up old fears. She just watched him, eyes dark and calm, like a soul too small to know how to be afraid anymore. Eli didn't know what to do with quiet like that. He'd grown used to silence that bit back, silence that reminded him who wasn't there. But this kind was different. It was alive, fragile, like a candle burning where there should have been smoke. When morning came, Clara was already outside, sitting on the steps, watching the sunrise bleed over the valley. Eli poured coffee and stepped onto the porch, careful not to startle her. You're a long way from town, he said. She shrugged. Town's mean. They said you eat people. He almost choked on the coffee. Do I look like I got teeth for that? She smiled, small and crooked. Didn't think so. The sound of it, her laugh, rattled something loose in his chest. He found himself talking more than he had in years. Told her about the horses that wandered too far from water, about the one-eyed mule that hated everyone but him. She listened, nodding, swinging her bare feet in the dust. When she got quiet again, he asked, You got anyone left? Clara looked toward the horizon, eyes shining in the morning light. Don't know. Maybe God's keeping them busy. He didn't answer. God had been quiet with him too. Before noon, she followed him to the corral, asking 100 questions: why horses sleep standing up, why cactus flowers only bloom for a night, why his face looked like it was made of rivers. He wanted to tell her it wasn't a story worth telling, but every time she looked up at him, he forgot the words. When the sun dipped low, Clara reached for his hand without thinking, her small fingers wrapping around his scarred ones. He froze, breath caught. No one had touched him since the fire. Not once. And yet here she was. A child who didn't flinch. A lost girl who held his hand like it was still worth holding. By the third day, the wind carried word faster than any rider could. Someone in town had seen a little girl walking the dry creek road, and the monster who took her in. The story twisted before sundown, grew teeth and horns. They said Eli Cartwright stole her. Said he lured her with candy, kept her locked away in that burnt-out cabin. By nightfall, 3 men were already saddling up, whiskey-warm and righteous. Up on the hill, Eli didn't yet know he'd become a crime again. He was fixing the hinge on the barn door when Clara came running, barefoot, breathless. "There's men comin'," she gasped. From town. He felt it before he saw the dust trail. That kind of storm always looked the same: 3 riders, hard eyes, rifles slung low. The kind that didn't come to talk. He turned toward her, calm but sharp. "Go inside. Under the floorboards. Now." She shook her head. "I'm not leavin' you. Do as I say." His voice cracked thunder, the kind that makes even wild horses stop mid-step. Clara hesitated, then ran inside, vanishing through the trapdoor he'd built years ago for a life that had already burned. The riders reached the yard before he could wipe the dirt from his hands. The first one, Harlan Pike, the town's blacksmith, spat in the dust. "You got a girl here, Eli?" Eli leaned against the post, eyes steady. "Got a cat and a conscience. Neither one'll talk to you." The second man laughed. "We just come to see. Ain't no harm in that." They stepped off their horses, boots crunching on dry earth. Eli's hand hovered near the rifle by the door. "You check my place without a warrant, I'll take that as trespass." Pike sneered. "You ain't got rights, Cartwright. You gave those up when you burned your own." The words hit harder than he let show. He remembered that night, the screams, the fire, the helplessness, but he stood his ground. "That fire took more than you'll ever understand," he said quietly. The youngest man threw a lantern. It hit the dirt first, glass bursting, flame licking fast up the dry grass near the porch. Clara's cry echoed from below, small and terrified. Eli spun, grabbed his rifle, not to fire, but to knock the lantern clear. Flames spread anyway. "Get the girl," someone shouted. But when they looked again, Eli was gone, disappeared into the smoke, dragging Clara through the back window, his coat wrapped around her like armor. Behind them, the cabin burned again. Only this time, he carried life out of the fire. They walked until the fire was just a bruise on the horizon. Smoke trailed behind them like a curse that refused to loosen. Clara's small hand gripped Eli's sleeve the whole way, even when her steps faltered. By the time they reached the dry riverbed, the night had turned cold and quiet. The stars burned sharp above them, merciless and bright, like eyes that had seen it all before. Eli lowered her onto a blanket and knelt beside her. Her feet were blistered, her lips cracked, her little chest trembling with every breath. He pulled a canteen from his coat and tipped it gently to her mouth. She drank slow, eyes half open, whispering something about her mother's hands. He didn't ask. He tore strips from his shirt to bind her feet, working by moonlight. Each knot he tied felt like he was stitching something broken inside himself too. She watched him through the haze, small face pale, lashes wet with sweat. "Why'd they burn your house?" she asked quietly. Eli's hands stilled. He wanted to lie, to tell her it was an accident, that people weren't cruel for sport. But the truth had already taken everything from him once. "They thought I did a thing I didn't," he said. "And when folks decide what you are, truth don't much matter after that." Clara blinked. "They said you're a monster." He met her gaze. "Maybe I was. But not today." She smiled, weak but real. Then her eyes fluttered shut, and for the first time since he'd found her, she slept. When dawn came, he carried her deeper into the canyon where the cliffs broke the wind. He found the old remains of a church, just walls and a cross half fallen, the altar turned to dust. But it was shelter. He set her down on a pew, gathered wood, lit a small fire that painted her face in amber light. Hours later, she stirred, sitting up to watch the flames. Her voice came soft, half dreaming. "Papa?" The word froze him. He hadn't been anyone's father since the fire took that from him too. But her hand reached out again, same as the first day. He took it this time without hesitation, his scarred palm closing around her small fingers. "Yeah," he said quietly, throat thick. "I'm here." And in that broken church, between ash and silence, something living took its first breath again. Weeks passed, and the world forgot its own noise. The canyon became their refuge, a place of wind, water, and second chances. Eli hunted rabbits, fixed an old wagon wheel for kindling, and taught Clara to tie knots the way cowhands did. She learned fast, her laughter rising above the sound of the riverbed wind, a melody that had no business surviving this harsh land, but did anyway. Down in town, the story changed again. Some said the monster had killed the girl and buried her in the hills. Others said they'd seen smoke where the cabin used to stand. A few whispered something stranger, that a man with half a face was seen carrying a child through the fire and never looked back. One morning, the preacher's wife rode out with 2 men and a wagon. She said she couldn't shake the dream of a little girl calling her name. When they found the canyon, she almost didn't see them at first. Eli was teaching Clara how to braid rope, sunlight flashing off the steel of his belt buckle, his ruined face softened by something gentler than pity could name. Clara saw the woman first and ran to her. "Miss Eliza," she cried, her voice bright. The woman dismounted, tears welling. She dropped to her knees, gathering the girl up, feeling the weight of her, real, breathing, safe. Then her eyes found Eli. He stood a few paces off, hat low, every muscle ready to flee. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Clara tugged the woman's sleeve and said, "This is my friend Eli." Eliza hesitated. She had heard the stories, the burnt man, the curse, the warnings, but the truth of him stood right there, a man who had carried a child out of a fire. She rose slowly and crossed the space between them. "Thank you," she said. Then, without fear, she held out her hand. Eli stared at it, unsure what to do. Then Clara came back, slipping her small hand into his first. "See," she whispered. "It's not scary." He took Eliza's hand, rough and careful. The touch felt like a gate swinging open after a long, bitter winter. By sundown, the wagon rolled back toward town, Clara asleep against Eliza's shoulder. Eli watched from the hill, smoke rising from his small fire, the world quiet again, but not lonely. Sometimes, after that, children from town would climb the hill with bread, or stories, or flowers. They didn't call him a monster anymore. They just called him Eli. If this story found a place in your heart, remember, kindness is the bravest thing a person can give. Out here, where dust buries everything but truth, that's what keeps the West alive. This was Unreal West.